April 8, 1933. 1000 feet above Seattle, Washington. The roar of the Messerschmitt Bf 109 engines filled the cramped cockpit of Hauptmann Erich Vogel's reconnaissance plane. Frost bites at his fingers through the thin leather gloves, and the whistling wind scrapes against the fuselage. Below, the world seems impossibly small farms, roads and rivers like threads stitched into the earth. But then, something catches his eye. Rows upon rows of gleaming metal structures stretch beyond the horizon. Factories, massive, sprawling, alive with movement. Smokestacks hiss and churn, and assembly lines hum like giant, synchronized hearts. Hauptmann Vogel blinks. He blinks again. His mind searches for the familiar shapes of European industry, Dresden, Leipzig, even the Ruhr, but nothing prepares him for this scale. Thousands of workers swarm the grounds, each movement precise, urgent, coordinated. Men and women, side by side, lifting, hammering, welding, and moving crates of parts with a speed that seems impossible. Giant cranes hoist fuselages like toys, dropping them into massive bays. He can almost hear the synchronized pounding of hammers in perfect rhythm across the entire plant. And the planes, dozens, no, hundreds of B-17 seconds, B-24 seconds, an experimental fighter, roll off conveyor belts like water pouring from a dam, ready for war before Europe can even blink. Vogel tightens his jaw. This is not a single factory. It is a city of machines. A city designed for one purpose, total production. He jots notes frantically, sketching lines in his logbook. He's never seen anything like it. Not in Stuttgart, not in Berlin, not in Munich. He squints through the icy glass. The Americans are everywhere, yet calm, almost unaware of his shadow overhead. You can almost feel the awe mixed with dread clawing at him. His mind races how many planes could this place produce in a week, in a month. Could Germany ever match it? Then the first thought hits him, this isn't industry, this is war itself, made tangible. A sudden flare of movement draws his attention to a new section of the plant. Tanks of fuel glimmer in the sunlight, and railcars roll into bays stacked with crates, waiting to be loaded. The magnitude is incomprehensible, and as the plane banks sharply, he catches the sight of a single, massive hall, its roof disappearing into the clouds. Inside, thousands of frames lie in every stage of assembly, and you can almost hear the invisible clock ticking, counting the hours until each aircraft will rise into the sky. Hauptmann Vogel exhales, frost fogging the edges of his goggles. He scribbles again, industrial might beyond imagination, morale and production fused into a single unstoppable force. The enemy is not what we thought. But even as he writes, another, darker realization begins to settle. If these factories continue day after day, the skies above Europe will soon be filled with machines his Luftwaffe could barely hope to touch. And with that, awe becomes fear. The next morning, April 9th, Vogel's flight returned to the skies above Seattle. The sun glinted off steel roofs, casting sharp, geometric shadows over a scene that seemed almost unreal. From above, the factories no longer looked like buildings, they looked like living, breathing machines, stretching for miles, humming with an energy that defied imagination. Below, the assembly lines were alive with motion. Women in coveralls moved with the precision of clockwork, lifting fuselages, sliding wings into place, testing instruments with rapid efficiency. Men welded and hammered, while forklifts zipped along rails carrying heavy engine blocks. Each movement was purposeful, part of a choreography so precise it could have been rehearsed for years. Vogel's navigator, Lieutenant Karl Richter, leaned forward, squinting through the glass. "Hauptmann, that many planes, in 1 week?" he whispered, disbelief lacing every syllable. Vogel didn't answer. There were too many numbers, too many variables. He could see at least 200 aircraft, either partially or fully assembled. He could hear the rhythmic pounding of hammers and the whirring of conveyor belts in his mind. The scale of it pressed down on him like gravity itself. And then he saw the test fields. The freshly assembled planes taxied toward runways that stretched endlessly, engines roaring to life in a coordinated symphony. As each B-17 took off, it seemed less like a single aircraft and more like a manifestation of American industrial will, a tangible weapon of production. Vogel's stomach tightened. He had flown over many targets in Europe, but nothing had ever felt this unstoppable. A sudden thought struck him, chilling in its clarity. The Germans could not replicate this. Not in the Ruhr, not in Berlin, not anywhere. Germany's factories were powerful, but these were cities, entire cities dedicated to war. And the more he watched, the more he realized something terrifying. The Americans were not just making planes, they were making armies in steel, Vogel adjusted his goggles, trying to focus. Below, a new assembly hall was opening its doors. Through the open roof, he could glimpse hundreds of workers pushing gliders, engines and bombers into position. Sparks flew from welding torches, flames reflected on steel, and the scent of hot metal seemed almost audible, even from above. He scribbled again in his notebook, no fortress, no tank, no tactical maneuver can withstand sheer numbers of machines. The war is industrial now. And yet, amidst the awe, Vogel noticed something else. These were ordinary people. They weren't soldiers, there were no officers barking orders, no drills, no rigid formation. Just humans, men, women, sometimes children working together with a precision that felt almost supernatural. It wasn't fear driving them. It was purpose. Karl leaned back pale. Hauptmann, I think we underestimated them. Vogel didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed on the horizon, tracing the endless rows of assembly bays, smokestacks, and runways. Then, as if sensing the enormity of the moment, he muttered under his breath, "They aren't just making planes, they're making the future." And as the plane banked for its return flight, a new, heavier feeling settled in Vogel's chest, a mix of awe, disbelief, and dread. He could not yet articulate it, but deep down he knew that this flight would change everything he thought he knew about the war and Germany's chances of winning it. By late afternoon, Vogel's reconnaissance mission carried him over a different sector of the Boeing plant, one dedicated to engines. Here, the scale of American production became almost unbearable to comprehend. Hundreds of Pratt and Whitney radial engines lay in neat rows, their polished surfaces catching the sunlight like frozen explosions. Workers moved around them in a precise ballet torque, wrenches in hand, measuring, instruments humming, engine components slotted into place with exacting care. Vogel could almost hear the pulse of the place. Each engine represented more than steel and mechanics. It was a promise of power, of altitude, of bombs carried across oceans. Every worker, every rivet, every motion contributed to a single, unstoppable rhythm. He scribbled frantically. These are not just machines, they are war incarnate. And then came the human element that struck him hardest. Women, many barely 20, ran overhead cranes lifting wings that would weigh half a ton. Men coordinated forklifts with precise timing, moving crates of instruments as if they were chess pieces. And yet there was laughter, brief smiles, a rhythm that almost made the industrial chaos feel alive. They were tired, yes, but unstoppable. It was as if purpose had given the endurance far beyond fatigue. Vogel's stomach knotted. In Europe he had seen factories, yes, but none like this. German factories were disciplined, regimented, powerful but sterile. These American plants were a fusion of ingenuity and human drive. He realized with a pang of fear, even if we bomb every city in the Ruhr, we cannot match this. Not in numbers, not in will. He caught sight of a convoy of trucks delivering raw materials, steel, aluminum, wiring, fed directly into the assembly halls like arteries pumping life into a massive organism. And with every plane leaving the line, he felt a creeping realization settle in his chest. Germany's enemies were not just making planes, they were building a tidal wave. A sudden movement in the corner of his eye drew him to the test runway. Engines roared, propellers sliced the air, and the first B-24 of the day lifted with ease. Vogel blinked. Hundreds more waited. Each takeoff was a drumbeat in a symphony that Germany had no hope of silencing. Karl leaned over, voice low. "Do you see it, Hauptmann? This is different. They're not just producing, they're evolving war itself." Vogel's hand tightened around his logbook. He knew, in a way that cut sharper than any bullet, that this flight would haunt him, not because of the risk of anti-aircraft fire, but because he had seen the impossible. A machine of men and steel that Germany could never recreate. And as the sun dipped lower, casting the sprawling plant in long shadows, Vogel realized the grim truth. The tide of war had already shifted, and the Axis had only just begun to notice. As Vogel circled higher, the late afternoon sun glinted off a massive new hall at Lockheed's plant in Burbank. From this altitude, the scale of production was almost surreal. Hundreds of P-38 Lightnings, partially assembled, glistened like silver fish in the water. Cranes lifted fuselages, wings and tail sections into place with astonishing precision. The sound of industry, the pounding of presses, the whine of drills, the rhythmic hum of conveyor belts seemed to reach him even at 25,000 feet. Vogel leaned closer to the glass. Smoke curled from stacks, but it didn't choke the sky, it fueled it. Workers poured in and out of doors like clockwork, their movements deliberate, unhesitant, yet fluid. It was as if the entire plant breathed, lived, and thought, a colossal organism powered by human hands and relentless purpose. He turned to Karl, whose face was pale under his goggles. "Do you realize what we're seeing?" Vogel asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. Karl shook his head. No Luftwaffe officer could have imagined this. And that was when the dread settled fully. For weeks, German intelligence had been tracking Allied production, feeding estimates and projections back to Berlin. But the reality, the sheer magnitude, the precision, the speed was beyond imagination. One plant, one city of machines, was producing more aircraft in a single month than Germany could muster in an entire quarter. Vogel exhaled, his breath fogging the cockpit glass. "They're not just building planes," he muttered. "They're building war itself, faster than we can fight it." Below, a P-38 rolled onto the runway, engines screaming. A worker waved, oblivious, to the German plane overhead. The aircraft lifted effortlessly, slicing through the sky with deadly grace. And then another, and another. It was endless, a constant stream of deadly promise, each plane a harbinger of bombing raids to come over Europe. Vogel scribbled in his logbook, "If Germany cannot match this pace, cannot match this skill, defeat is inevitable. Our calculations, our strategies, they may already be obsolete." A sudden flare of movement drew his attention to a nearby rail line, feeding raw materials into the plant. Trains arrived every few minutes, loaded to capacity with aluminum, engines and parts. Workers unloaded them with lightning speed, and another wave of planes entered the assembly line. Vogel's eyes widened. This is not a factory. This is a war engine. An unstoppable machine. He gripped the controls tighter. The awe that had first filled him was gone, replaced by a gnawing fear, a realization that Germany was racing against a tide it could not possibly hold back. Even the Kriegsmarine, even the Luftwaffe's finest, could not change the arithmetic of sheer production. And as the plane banked for home, Vogel's stomach churned. He had seen the impossible. He had seen the future of war, and it was terrifying. By the time Vogel's plane headed back toward the Pacific coast, the sun was dipping behind the Olympic mountains, casting long shadows over the sprawling factories. He could no longer look at them with detached curiosity. Every assembly hall, every runway, every hum of machinery pressed against his mind like a relentless drumbeat. Production, efficiency, inevitability. He opened his logbook again, scribbling numbers furiously. One plant alone was producing more than 50 aircraft per week. Another, slightly smaller, could crank out 30 fighters and bombers in days. The scale was incomprehensible. Even if Germany captured every European industrial hub, even if the Luftwaffe's engineers doubled their output, it would not come close. Not close. The math was brutal, and Vogel's pen trembled slightly as he wrote it down. Karl leaned back, pale, silent. "Hauptmann, they're unbeatable, aren't they?" Vogel didn't answer at first. He looked out over the horizon, tracing the fading smoke trails and glinting rooftops of American industry. Then he finally spoke, voice low, almost a whisper, not in combat, not in numbers, not in endurance. "They have built more than weapons. They have built inevitability itself." For a moment, they flew in silence, only the whine of engines and the crackle of radio static filling the cockpit. The scale of what they had witnessed pressed down like the weight of 1,000 tons. And in that silence, Vogel realized the terrifying truth. The war was no longer just a contest of skill, courage, or strategy. It had become a race against the sheer power of production, and Germany was already behind. Below, lights began to flicker in the plant air. Night shift workers continued the ceaseless rhythm of assembly. Flickering flames from welding torches cut through the dimming light. The Americans were relentless, their factories a never-ending river of aircraft. Vogel's stomach tightened. He had flown over many targets in his career, but never one so alive, so terrifying in its scale and inevitability. He scribbled one final note before shutting his logbook, a single sentence that would later haunt him. "We are witnessing the end of the old order. Germany cannot fight the tide of machines they are unleashing." And as the plane cut through the clouds toward home, a cold wind biting at their faces, Vogel's mind refused to let go of the image. Thousands of aircraft, moving, growing, multiplying, each one a silent promise that the Allies' industrial might would not just challenge Germany, it would overwhelm it. Night had fallen by the time Vogel's plane crossed the Cascade Mountains, the sky a dark canvas dotted with stars. Inside the cockpit, the hum of the engines felt almost oppressive, a relentless reminder of the mission they had just completed. Vogel and Karl sat in a tense silence, both lost in thought, haunted by what they had seen. Below them, the cities of the American West Coast glimmered faintly in the darkness, but Vogel could still picture the sprawling factory. In perfect detail, the endless assembly lines, the towering cranes, the ceaseless flow of raw materials transformed into instruments of war. Every rivet, every wing, every bomber rolling off the line pressed itself into his memory. He could almost hear the hum of machinery in his mind, a ghostly echo that would not fade. Carl broke the silence, voice low, almost fearful. "Do you think they'll stop?" he asked. Vogel shook his head, his jaw tight. "Stop? No. Not until Europe is beneath their shadow. We have underestimated the Americans, Carl, entirely. This is not a fight of tactics or courage anymore. It is arithmetic, sheer numbers. The numbers are against us." As they approached the coast, Vogel allowed himself a brief glance downward. The faint outlines of small towns and rivers passed beneath them, but he could not focus on them. His mind replayed the visions from the day, the metal, the workers, the endless lines of aircraft climbing into the sky. And with each replay, the realization deepened. Germany's best pilots, Germany's finest engineers, Germany's entire army might one day face an enemy that never rested, never slowed, never faltered. For a moment, he felt the weight of history pressing on him. Not the history of battles won or lost, but the history of human will and industrial power. The Americans were not just fighting, they were reshaping the rules of war itself. And Germany, proud, disciplined, and brilliant as it was, had not anticipated this scale, this ingenuity, this unstoppable force. Vogel tightened his grip on the controls. Somewhere deep in him, a silent alarm sounded. If the Allies could produce this now, imagine what they could produce in the coming months. Imagine the skies over Europe filled with these machines, each one faster, stronger, more numerous than anything the Luftwaffe could counter. The thought made him shiver, a cold premonition that the tide of war had shifted irreversibly. Carl, sensing his commander's mood, hesitated, then finally spoke again. "Hauptmann, what do we tell Berlin?" Vogel didn't answer immediately. He stared ahead into the darkness, the lights of the American cities fading behind them. Then, finally, he murmured, "Tell them the truth they will not want to hear. We are facing a force we cannot match, not in courage, not in skill, but in scale, in resolve. They are building a war that we cannot fight, and every plane that leaves these factories is another nail in our coffin." The silence that followed was thick, filled only by the roar of engines cutting through the night. Neither man spoke again, each lost in their own calculations, their own fears. One thing was certain, nothing would ever feel the same again. As the coast disappeared behind them, Vogel's eyes lingered on the stars. He knew that the next time they flew over Europe, they would not just be facing the enemy. They would be facing the product of this relentless, awe-inspiring, terrifying machine. April 12, 1943. Luftwaffe Headquarters, Berlin. Hauptmann Erich Vogel sat rigidly at a long oak table, the faint scent of cigarette smoke and ink filling the room. His reconnaissance photographs lay spread before General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, each image a testament to a scale of industry that no German had dared to imagine. Vogel cleared his throat. "Herr General, what we observed, it is unlike anything in Europe. The Americans are not just producing aircraft, they are producing a war machine." Kesselring's brow furrowed. "Hauptmann, you exaggerate." Vogel shook his head. "I do not exaggerate. I saw thousands of workers, entire factories that operate like cities, engines, wings, fuselages, all moving in a rhythm beyond our comprehension. One plant alone produces more aircraft in a week than Germany can muster in a month. The scale, the efficiency, it is unprecedented." General Kesselring leaned back, eyes narrowing at the photographs. Rows of B-17 seconds, P-38 seconds, and B-24 seconds gleamed in the sunlight, assembly lines stretching endlessly in every frame. "And the workers?" he asked. "Ordinary people," Vogel replied. "Men, women, even teenagers. They work with precision and purpose, without the rigid discipline of the Wehrmacht or Luftwaffe. And yet, their results surpass ours in every way. They are relentless. They do not stop." A silence fell over the room. Kesselring's fingers drummed on the table, his mind turning over Vogel's words. For decades, German officers had prided themselves on discipline, strategy, and superior engineering. Yet here was evidence that even the finest training, the sharpest tactics, and the most brilliant designs could be rendered irrelevant by sheer industrial power. Vogel continued, voice steady but heavy. "They are creating not just aircraft, but inevitability. With this production, they can replenish losses faster than we can inflict them. They will flood the skies over Europe, and our efforts, no matter how brave, may not be enough." Kesselring exhaled slowly, a shadow crossing his face. "This changes everything. The war is no longer just fought in the air or on the ground. It is fought in factories, in cities, in the relentless rhythm of production." Vogel nodded, the weight of the realization settling fully. He had witnessed the impossible, the combination of human will, ingenuity, and industrial power that Germany could not match. And now, he understood the hardest truth of all. The Axis was already behind. As the meeting adjourned, Vogel looked back at the photographs, tracing the endless lines of planes with his finger. A chill ran down his spine. He could almost see them taking off, hundreds at a time, a tide of machines rolling toward Europe, unstoppable and inexorable. And deep down, he knew that the war was entering a new phase, one that Germany might not survive. The battlefield was no longer just skies and fields, it was the very factories that hum with life, thousands of miles away, building an army that could not be defeated. Weeks later, in a dimly lit briefing room in Berlin, Vogel faced a room of high-ranking Luftwaffe officers. Maps of Allied airfields and production plants were pinned across the walls, each photo a silent indictment of German underestimation. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Officers whispered, shuffled papers, and cast uneasy glances at one another. Vogel stepped forward, voice steady but urgent. "Gentlemen, what we have witnessed is not a mistake. It is a force. The Americans are producing aircraft at a scale, with a speed, and with a coordination we cannot match. Entire cities of men and women work together day and night, building more planes than we could ever hope to destroy." The room was quiet. Some officers looked incredulous, others pale with dawning realization. General Ernst Busch leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Hauptmann, are you suggesting that this industrial power could decide the war?" Vogel did not hesitate. Yes, not tactics, not courage, not skill alone. If these factories continue, the tide of air superiority will shift permanently. They are not just making machines, they are making inevitability. A murmur rippled through the room. Officers who had fought in Poland, France, and Russia could scarcely reconcile what they were hearing. The proud Luftwaffe, once believed to be the most formidable air force in the world, was now confronted with a terrifying truth. Germany's enemies were not only powerful, they were endless. Vogel turned back to the map, pointing to Seattle, Burbank, and the sprawling industrial belts of the American West. Every bomber, every fighter, every engine leaves these plants with one purpose: to dominate the skies over Europe. And they have no intention of slowing down. A young Oberleutnant swallowed hard. "Hauptmann, is there anything we can do?" Vogel paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Not against the scale. Not against the speed. The only fight we have left is in strategy, in choosing where to engage, and even then, it will be a fight against numbers that grow faster than we can destroy them." The room fell into tense silence. The hum of the heating system and the distant clatter of boots in the hallway were the only sounds. Vogel knew that he had changed the course of discussion, perhaps forever. He had shown the Luftwaffe the impossible, and now the officers had to grapple with it. And as the meeting adjourned, Vogel lingered at the doorway, looking back at the maps and photographs. He imagined the sprawling factories again, the endless rows of planes, the rhythm of men and women working without pause. His chest tightened. The war, as he had known it, was over. A new era had begun, a war where machines, numbers, and industrial will would decide the outcome long before the first bombs fell. Spring 1943 turned into summer, and the reality of Vogel's reconnaissance began to ripple through the upper echelons of the Wehrmacht. Reports of American production rates, once dismissed as exaggeration, now appeared with increasing frequency on Hitler's desk. Every statistic, every photograph, every eyewitness account painted the same chilling picture. The Allies were not just catching up, they were surpassing Germany in every metric that mattered. Vogel often replayed his flight in his mind, as if the cockpit itself had etched the image into his memory. He could see the endless rows of B-17s again, cranes lifting fuselages with uncanny precision, women and men moving in perfect rhythm like the cogs of an enormous, unstoppable clock. Each plane was a promise, each engine was a heartbeat, and together they formed a tie that Germany could not hope to resist. The Luftwaffe officers began speaking in hushed tones about strategy, rationing, and miracle weapons, but Vogel knew the truth. It was not tactics that would save them. It was not courage. It was arithmetic. No fighter, no ace, no daring maneuver could offset the scale of what he had witnessed. At night, Vogel would stare at the stars and imagine the skies over Europe flooded with these aircraft, hundreds at a time, each one a silent harbinger of devastation. He imagined the Ruhr under the whine of B-17 engines, Berlin under the shadow of relentless bombers, entire cities measured not by their courage, but by their industrial output. And yet, even as fear gripped him, Vogel felt a bitter awe. The Americans had built something extraordinary, something that transcended ordinary war. They had fused human will with machinery, precision with purpose, and created not just planes but inevitability itself. He understood then, fully, why Germany had underestimated them. The human eye could not easily grasp such scale. The human mind could not easily process such efficiency. And the human heart, Vogel realized with grim clarity, could scarcely feel the full weight of what production alone could achieve. As he prepared for his next mission, Vogel scribbled a final note in his logbook, words that would later be cited in top-secret reports. To Berlin, we face not just an enemy of pilots and soldiers, but an enemy of machines, of cities, of relentless human will. The war has shifted, and we are already behind. And in that moment, the enormity of what he had witnessed finally sank in. The tide was no longer something they could fight, it was a force they could only hope to survive.